The wind howled through the desolate landscape, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth. The alien woman stood at the edge of a valley, her pale blue skin shimmering under the pale light of the twin moons above. Her heart ached with the weight of loss. She was the last of her kind. Her pack, once strong and proud, had been wiped out in a brutal raid by an enemy she didn't fully understand. They had come with fire and fury, leaving nothing but ashes and silence in their wake. Her name was Lyra, and she had known nothing but the company of her pack since she could remember. Her species lived in harmony with the land, traveling from one place to the next, hunting and gathering, always together. But now, she was alone. She sat on a jagged rock, staring out into the distance, her thoughts as empty as the land before her. What was she supposed to do now? There were no other packs, no family to turn to. Her people had been nomads, always moving, and now there was no reason to move at all. She didn't know where to go, or even if she should go anywhere. The pain in her chest was constant, a reminder of everything she had lost. A noise broke through her thoughts' footsteps, heavy and steady. Lyra's head snapped up, her senses immediately on alert. She didn't know if it was another enemy or a wild creature, but she couldn't afford to take any chances. Her fingers brushed the edge of her blade, the only weapon she had left, a relic of her past life. From behind a cluster of boulders, a figure emerged. It was a human, tall and dressed in weathered armor, a rifle slung across his back. He didn't seem to notice her at first, his attention focused on the horizon. Lyra's heart raced as she watched him. It was unlike any creature she had encountered before. His skin was pale, his eyes a deep brown, and he moved with a quiet confidence that made him seem dangerous. But Lyra wasn't afraid. She had been trained to fight, to survive. She had faced many threats before, and if this human was one, she would be ready. The soldier stopped and turned his head, his eyes locking with hers. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. His eyes widened in surprise, and Lyra saw something in them: curiosity, uncertainty, but no fear. He didn't draw his weapon or take a defensive stance. Instead, he slowly lowered his hands to his sides, showing that he meant no harm. "Are you lost?" the man asked, his voice rough, but not unkind. The words were strange, alien to her, but the tone was clear enough. He was trying to understand, to communicate. Lyra didn't answer. She couldn't. Her thoughts were too tangled, too jumbled with grief and confusion she had never encountered. A human before, and in this moment she wasn't sure what to make of him. Was he another enemy, or was he something else? The thought of trust seemed distant. She had lost so much, and it felt impossible to open up to anyone, even someone who seemed so human. The soldier took a cautious step forward, still watching her closely. "I won't hurt you," he said, as though sensing her hesitation. "Just looking for shelter." Lyra's gaze flickered to the barren land around them. Shelter was something she hadn't thought about in a long time. Her pack had always taken care of each other, always found shelter together. But now she was alone, and the cold winds felt sharper than ever. The soldier, noticing her silence, shifted uncomfortably, seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps for her to speak, or perhaps for her to make the first move. Lyra's fingers tightened around the hilt of her blade, but she didn't raise it. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way his posture remained open, the lack of aggression in his body language. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed to understand the weight of her loss, even though he didn't know her story. Slowly she stood, her movements cautious but deliberate. She wasn't sure what to do, but she wasn't ready to turn away either. The soldier had made no move to harm her, and for the first time since her world had crumbled, she didn't feel completely alone. She gestured toward the rocky valley, her voice soft and unsure as she said, "Shelter, you can stay." For the night, the soldier blinked, surprised by her response. It was clear he hadn't expected her to offer anything, but his face softened, a hint of gratitude in his expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll be careful. I don't want to make things worse." Lyra nodded, unsure of what he meant. She didn't know if she was helping or making things more complicated, but in that moment she decided it didn't matter. It wasn't much just a place to stay. Just a single night, but for both of them, it was enough. They walked in silence to the small shelter she had found, nestled in the shadow of the rocks. The soldier set down his gear, still keeping his distance but grateful for the warmth of the shelter. As the night grew colder, Lyra watched him quietly, the firelight flickering in his eyes. They didn't speak much. There were no grand gestures, no promises of friendship or alliance. But as the wind howled outside, Lyra found herself sitting just a little closer to the soldier than before. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe it was the safety, or maybe it was because, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the last one left. The days following the soldier's arrival were strange for Lyra. She had never expected to find herself sharing space with another living being again, let alone a human. But there he was, sitting near the fire she had built, his eyes studying the flickering flames. She couldn't understand him, not fully, but she found herself observing him more than she intended. His movements were slow, careful, as if he was trying not to disturb the silence they shared. Lyra watched him from the corner of her eye, her mind running in circles. She had always known her kind were solitary by nature, but she hadn't expected the deep sense of loneliness that weighed her down every time she was left alone in her thoughts. It had been years since she had last been in the company of her pack. In the quiet moments, the grief she had buried so deeply would return. It gripped her heart, filling her chest with an aching emptiness. It was too painful to think about. Lyra couldn't let herself feel that loss. Not again. The soldier, however, seemed to understand that grief in some way. He never pushed her to speak, never asked about her past. He simply sat by the fire, sharing his silence with her, and it was enough. His presence, though foreign, felt oddly comforting, like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to blanket the sky, Lyra found herself speaking. It wasn't something she had planned. The words just came. "I lost them," she whispered, staring into the fire. "My pack. They were all I had." The soldier glanced at her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. There was no pity in his words, just understanding. He had lost comrades. He had lost things too. Didn't need to ask for details. He knew what it felt like to lose someone. Lyra didn't look at him. She didn't want him to see the tears threatening to spill. She hadn't cried in days, in weeks. It felt too painful to allow herself that release. Instead, she focused on the flames, the only thing that didn't demand anything from her. The soldier shifted closer, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, "to lose everything, but it doesn't mean you're alone." Lyra's eyes flickered toward him. His voice wasn't just an empty comfort. There was something in the way he spoke, something sincere. She felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in so long. It was the kind of warmth she had once felt when her pack had gathered around a fire, when they shared stories and laughed together. That warmth was something she had thought lost forever. But here it was again, quietly growing between her and this stranger. The soldier seemed to sense the shift in her mood. He didn't push for more, didn't demand anything else from her. Simply sat in silence, letting her have her space, allowing her to process her emotions in her own time. As the night wore on, they both settled into a comfortable rhythm. Lyra didn't know what had changed, but something had. Perhaps it was the soldier's presence or the simple act of speaking her truth. Whatever it was, she felt something she hadn't felt since the day her pack had been taken from her, hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. The following days passed in a quiet blur. Lyra and the soldier moved through their routine. She hunted, using her skills to catch small prey, and he helped her gather firewood or work on repairs to the shelter. There was no rush, no urgency. The soldier seemed content with the slow pace of their days, as though he was in no hurry to leave. It was strange for Lyra. She had always been used to moving quickly, to being on the move with her pack, always searching for the next place, the next challenge. But now, there was no need to rush. The world outside could wait. At night they sat by the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. Lyra had never been one to open up easily, and she didn't know if she ever would. But there was something about the soldier that made her feel ... safe. One evening, as the two of them ate their simple meal in silence, the soldier spoke again. His voice was calm, measured. "I didn't expect to find someone like you out here." Lyra raised an eyebrow, curious. "Someone like me?" she asked, though she wasn't sure what he meant. He shrugged slightly, as though trying to explain something. That was difficult to put into words. Someone who's lost everything but still keeps going. Most people would have given up by now. Lyra felt a quiet pride stir in her. She had never thought of herself as strong. She had always seen herself as the last of her kind, a survivor by accident, not by choice. But hearing the soldier's words made her realize something. Maybe she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. "Evolval is all I've known," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the fire. "If you don't keep going, you die, that's all." The soldier nodded, as if he understood. He didn't ask for more, didn't try to push her to speak further. Instead, he simply said, "Well, I'm glad you're still here." It was a simple statement, but it was the first time someone had told her that since her pack had been lost. She wasn't just surviving for survival's sake anymore. She was surviving because someone cared whether she did or not. The night deepened, and the fire crackled, casting long shadows across the ground. Lyra found herself sitting a little closer to the soldier than before. She didn't know why, but she felt comforted by his presence. Maybe it was the warmth of the fire, or maybe it was the warmth he brought into her life without even trying, as they sat together. The stars glittering above them, Lyra couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have a family again. She had once known the feeling of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself. She had lost that, but now, sitting beside the soldier, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to find it again. The days blended together for Lyra. Each one felt the same, yet different. The solitude that had once defined her existence now felt a little less oppressive with the soldier's presence. The nights were the hardest, but they were no longer. Filled with the same crushing silence that had suffocated her after losing her pack. Instead, there was a quiet peace. She found herself looking at the soldier more often, noticing the way he moved, the way his eyes softened when he spoke. There was something calming about him, something she hadn't expected, she had never thought much about human emotions before, but now, she couldn't help but wonder about his. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lyra found herself sharing more than she ever had before. She had told him bits and pieces about her pack, the stories of her people, of how they used to move together, strong and united. It was something she rarely spoke about, but tonight she felt like the weight of her memories wasn't so heavy. With him there, "I used to think that maybe, one day, we would settle down," Lyra said, her voice quiet. "That we would build a home somewhere, a place where we could stay." The soldier looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly, as if confused. "Why didn't you?" Lyra sighed, her gaze fixed on the flames. "We were never meant to stay in one place. Our people, we are always moving, always hunting, always running, from danger, from the next challenge. I thought we would always be together, that nothing could break us." The soldier's eyes softened. He didn't say anything at first. There was no need to. Lyra's pain was clear, and he knew. She wasn't just talking about the loss of her pack. She was talking about the loss of a dream, her dream of a life beyond survival. "Sounds like a good dream," he said softly. "But sometimes things change, and we change with them." Lyra glanced at him, surprised. She had never considered the possibility of change. Everything she had known had been torn away. She had always thought of her survival as just a way to keep going without really thinking about what might come next. But now, as she sat with the soldier, something inside her stirred. Could things really change? Could she? The soldier shifted. Closer, a careful gesture, as if testing the waters of their growing connection. "You don't have to be alone," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had never considered the possibility of being with someone like this, not since her pack had been taken from her. But the soldier's words made her think of something she had long forgotten. the idea of a family. She had once dreamed of raising young ones, of caring for others, just as her pack had cared for her. It had seemed so impossible after the destruction of her people, and now sitting here beside this human, it didn't seem so far-fetched. "I never thought about having a family," Lyra confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not after everything, I didn't think I could. I thought that part of me was gone, that I was just ... broken." The soldier reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not broken," he said gently. "You're just waiting for the right moment, and maybe that moment is here." Lyra turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze. She didn't know what. It was the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength he exuded. But in that moment, she felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built around her heart had started to crumble, not because of her past, but because of the possibility of something new. For the first time in a long time, Lyra allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the loss. She had once dreamt of a family, of a place where she would belong. And now she realized she didn't need to imagine it anymore. She had already found a part of it. The soldier, though human, had become more than just a stranger to her. He had become someone she could rely on, someone she could trust. And maybe, just maybe, he could be a part of that family. "Maybe you're right," Lyra said, her voice steady now. "Maybe I don't have to be alone." The soldier smiled, his face softening. "You never were alone, Lyra. Not really." That night, as they lay on the cold ground, side by side, the fire between them casting a warm glow, Lyra's mind drifted to thoughts of the future. She thought about what it would be like to build something with the soldier, to create something new from the ashes of her past. She had never considered it before. But the idea of a family, of having a place to call home, didn't feel impossible anymore. She had lost everything once. But maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe this soldier, this human, was the one she had been waiting for. The thought filled her with a sense of warmth that spread deep within her chest. The soldier had closed his eyes, and Lyra was left alone with her thoughts. She realized that, for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The pain of losing her pack would never go away, but it no longer defined her. She was more than just a survivor. She was someone who could heal, someone who could hope, someone who could dream again, and in the quiet of the night. As the wind rustled the leaves above them, Lyra made a silent promise to herself. She would not let fear dictate her future. She would let herself dream. She would let herself have the family she had always wanted, and maybe, just maybe, the soldier beside her would be part of that dream. The days that followed were filled with a quiet calm that neither Lyra nor the soldier had anticipated. They had grown accustomed to each other's presence, a shared silence that spoke louder than words. Yet Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the distance, just beyond the horizon. Something she couldn't control. She had always been aware of the dangers of the world around her. But the soldier's presence had allowed her to forget, even if just for a moment, that there was still a world out there full of threats. She didn't want to admit it, but the soldier's care had made her weak. She felt safer when he was around. When he wasn't, the fear crept back, like shadows in the corners of her mind. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Lyra noticed that the soldier's expression had shifted. His brow was furrowed, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a new intensity. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Lyra immediately stood, her senses alert. She had trained herself to notice the smallest change in the air, the slightest shift in the wind. The feeling that had been building inside her was finally confirmed. Something was coming. The soldier rose with her, his hand instinctively going to the rifle slung across his back. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes was enough for Lyra to understand. They were both aware of the growing danger. The pack she had once known had always been ready to fight, always prepared for whatever the world threw at them. Now, Lyra had to rely on the same instincts, even though she had no pack to fall back on. "I'll keep watch tonight," the soldier said, his tone firm. "You should rest. If something happens, we'll fight together." Lyra didn't argue. She knew he was right. She needed to rest, to regain her strength. But her mind wouldn't let her settle. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her eyes moved to the shadows, her senses alert, feeling the air grow thicker with each passing moment. The soldier, though calm, was tense. Lyra could see it in the way his fingers gripped the rifle, in the way his gaze darted from one shadow to the next. He'd been trained for this, trained to face danger, to protect those who were vulnerable. But what could he protect her from if the enemy was stronger, faster? What could he do if they came for her? The night stretched on in uneasy silence. Lyra's thoughts wandered back to the time before she had met the soldier. I'd been alone then too, but the dangers of the world had never seemed as close as they did now. When she had a pack, there had been strength in numbers. They had always had each other's backs. But now, she was alone again, alone with the soldier, she knew. The enemy was still out there, somewhere. She didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but she knew they wouldn't stop hunting her. She had seen enough of their devastation to understand that they wouldn't rest until she was gone, erased from existence. Lyra, the soldier's voice cut through her thoughts. His tone was serious, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon once more. I need you to stay close. We don't know when they'll come, but we have to be ready. She nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She had always been able to protect herself, always relied on her instincts and her strength. But the soldier was right. The world was different now, wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for them both. A soft rustle broke the silence, followed by another. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The soldier immediately tensed, his rifle raised, eyes scanning the darkness. The night seemed to hold its breath. They're here, Lyra whispered, her voice tight. With fear, she felt the weight of the moment press down on her chest. She had known it was coming, but now that it was here, she was not prepared. The soldier's eyes were sharp. Stay behind me, and don't make a sound. Lyra nodded. Hand tightened around the hilt of her blade, her body instinctively moving into position. The alien training in her blood took over. She was no longer the grieving survivor. She was a warrior once more, standing at the edge of everything she had left. The soldier may have been her protector, but she had to protect him too. The footsteps grew louder, and then, from the shadows, they came figures, tall and cloaked, their movements smooth, almost unnatural. They were the enemy. Lyra recognized their shape from the stories her pack had passed down, from the scars left on the land after their raids. But they were different now. They were no longer just a distant threat. They were here, right in front of her, the soldier. Steadied his rifle, his breathing slow and deliberate. Lyra could see the tension in his muscles, the focus in his eyes. He was ready, but there was something about the way the enemy moved that unsettled her. They were not like anything she had fought before. Their presence alone seemed to change the air, to make the ground beneath her feet feel unstable. The soldier didn't hesitate. He fired first, a sharp crack echoing through the night. One of the cloaked figures collapsed to the ground, but the others didn't retreat. Instead, they moved faster, their limbs bending in unnatural ways as they closed in on the two of them. Lyra's heart raced. She had fought countless enemies before, but these creatures felt different, more like shadows than flesh. They moved with an eerie speed, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Lyra struck first, her blade slicing through one of the attackers with a swift motion. The creature crumpled, its body dissolving into nothingness as it hit the ground. But they kept coming, more of them silent and relentless. "Keep moving," the soldier shouted, pulling her away from the danger. "We need to get to higher ground." Together, they sprinted through the darkness, Lyra's heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if they would make it, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't face this fight alone. The night felt endless as Lyra and the soldier sprinted through the shadows. Their breath was sharp in the cold air, their hearts racing in unison. Every step they took was another moment they stayed ahead of their pursuers, but Lyra knew. Enemy was close. They moved faster than any creature she had encountered before, their eerie speed making it nearly impossible to escape. The soldier, though, was quick on his feet. He led them toward higher ground, his rifle held tightly in his hands. Lyra followed close behind, her senses heightened, her eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. The world around them seemed to be closing in as the creatures followed, relentless in their pursuit. "We need to reach the cliffs," the soldier called over his shoulder. "Can't outrun them on flat ground." Lyra nodded, knowing that the soldiers' instincts were right. The cliffs were their best chance. There they could find higher ground and maybe even gain some advantage. But with each passing moment, Lyra felt the weight of the enemy closing in. The creatures were faster than she had ever imagined. They didn't need to follow a path, they moved through the dark like shadows, never slowing, never hesitating. As they neared the cliffs, the soldier skidded to a stop, his eyes scanning the area. "We're almost there. Stay sharp." Lyra drew her blade and turned to face the creatures. Her body was tense, her muscles aching, but her mind was focused. She wasn't about to let them take her, not after everything she had survived. The soldier took his position beside her, his rifle aimed at the advancing creatures. He was ready, but then something unexpected happened. A deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The cliffs ahead seemed to shift, revealing a hidden passage that neither Lyra nor the soldier had noticed before. The creatures hesitated, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. This was their chance. "I need to get through that passage," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that still gripped her. The soldier nodded, his eyes calculating. "We're going in, but we need to move fast." Together, they sprinted toward the opening in the cliffs. The creatures seemed to hesitate, then surged forward, blocking their only escape route. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. They were trapped. Without thinking, she lunged toward the nearest creature, her blade cutting through the air. The creature hissed, but it didn't retreat. It lunged at her with a speed that caught her off guard, but she was ready. She sidestepped, narrowly avoiding its strike, and then, with a swift motion, she drove her blade deep into its side. The creature screeched in pain, its body crumpling to the ground. "Go," she shouted to the soldier. "I'll hold them off." Soldier hesitated, but only for a moment. "Stay alive, Lyra," he said, before darting toward the passage. Lyra knew he was right. She couldn't keep fighting forever. She needed to buy him time to escape. The creatures, sensing their prey was getting away, seemed to grow more aggressive. They surrounded her, their eyes glowing brighter in the dark. Lyra fought back, her movements swift and calculated. But with every strike she made, more of them appeared. She could feel the weight of the battle beginning to take its toll. Body was tired and her movements were slowing. She refused to back down. She wouldn't let them take her. Not now. The soldier, seeing the danger Lyra was in, turned and fired into the massive creatures. The sound of the rifle echoed through the cliffs, a sharp crack that sent some of the creatures recoiling. Lyra's eyes widened with realization. The soldier wasn't leaving, he was coming back for her. "Get out of here!" Lyra shouted, her voice fierce. "I'm right behind you," but the soldier didn't listen. He ran toward her, firing his rifle at the advancing creatures. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as the soldier reached her side. There was no time to argue. They had to move, or they would both be lost. Together, they fought their way through the creatures, the soldier covering Lyra as she struck out with her blade. Each movement was a blur, each strike a desperate attempt to escape. The creatures were relentless. But Lyra could feel the soldier's strength beside her, pushing her to fight harder to keep going. Finally, they reached the passage. Lyra's heart leaped as she saw the opening in the cliffs grow larger. The soldier was already ahead, his eyes focused on the path ahead. Lyra followed him without hesitation, her body moving on pure instinct now. She had to get through the passage, had to survive. As they ran, the last of the creatures hesitated, unwilling to follow them into the narrow, rocky passage. Lyra didn't stop to look back. She knew they had made it. For now, at least. The passage twisted and turned, leading them into the heart of the cliffs. Lyra could hear the sounds of the creatures fading behind them, but she didn't slow down. She could feel the soldier's presence beside her, his steady footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. Finally, they reached the end of the passage. The soldier stopped, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Lyra leaned against the wall, her heart still pounding in her chest. They were safe. For now, the soldier turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "That was too close," he said, his voice rough. Lyra nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Too close," she repeated. But as they stood in the dim light of the passage, Lyra realized something. They had made it. They had survived. And, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that they might just make it through this together. The soldier had stayed by her side, not as a protector, but as a partner, and she wasn't going to let that go. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The soldier gave her a small smile, the exhaustion on his face momentarily lifting. "We're not done yet, but we will be." Lyra couldn't help but smile back. For the first time in days, there was hope in her heart. The passage was silent, except for their breathing. Lyra could feel the weight of the battle they had just fought pressing down on her. But the soldier's presence beside her offered a quiet sense of relief. They had escaped the creatures, for now, but the fight was far from over. They were deep in the cliffs, far from their previous camp. And the world outside felt uncertain. The soldier glanced at her, his expression still tense but filled with determination. "We need to find shelter. Stay close." Lyra nodded, her body still trembling from the rush of adrenaline. The fear hadn't completely left her, but she knew the soldier was right. They had to keep moving if they wanted to survive. They walked for hours through the narrow tunnel, the walls around them rough and jagged. Lyra's mind kept returning to the battle they had just faced. The creatures had been faster than she expected, relentless in their pursuit. But what scared her most was the feeling of being hunted. The thought that they might be watching even now, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" Lyra asked, her voice softer than she intended. The soldier's response was calm, but there was an edge of concern in his eyes. "They'll come. They always do, but we'll be ready." His words brought her some comfort, though the uncertainty of the situation still hung in the air like a thick fog. She had never been afraid of fighting, but now something was different. She had something more to protect than just herself. She had ... hope. After what seemed like hours of walking, they reached a small clearing in the cliffs. The entrance was hidden behind a cluster of rocks, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. The soldier pointed toward the opening. "This will do." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes scanning the surroundings. It wasn't much a small cave-like shelter, but it was better than nothing. She stepped inside, she could finally relax. The fear of being exposed, of being hunted, began to fade. They were safe for the moment. The soldier went to work immediately, setting up a small campfire and securing their shelter. Lyra helped where she could, though her hands were still unsteady from the earlier fight. She knew they couldn't afford to rest for too long, but for the first time in days. She allowed herself a moment of peace. Sitting by the fire, Lyra watched the soldier. He was still focused, still alert, but there was something about the way he moved that reminded her of the first time they had met. Back then he had been a stranger, someone she wasn't sure she could trust. As she watched him work, she realized that he had become more than that. He wasn't just her protector anymore. He was her partner. After a few moments, the soldier sat down beside her, his expression softer than it had been before. "We've made it this far. We'll keep going." Lyra turned to look at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You keep saying that, but what if? What if we don't make it?" The soldier's gaze softened. "Then we make it together, no matter what happens. I'm not leaving you behind." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. His words were simple, but they meant everything. He had never promised her anything, yet in that moment, she knew he was all in. He had stood by her, fought beside her, and now he was promising to stay with her. No matter what the future held, she reached out, placing a hand over his. "You're not alone either. I'll stay with you, no matter what." Soldier's hand squeezed hers, a silent promise passing between them. For a brief moment, the weight of their shared past, the losses they had both endured, seemed to lift. It was just the two of them now, together. Surviving against the odds, the fire crackled between them, and Lyra found herself leaning in a little. Closer, feeling the warmth, not just from the flames, but from the soldier's presence beside her. She had never imagined finding someone who would fight for her the way he had. I never thought I'd find anyone like you, Lyra admitted softly. I was alone for so long, and I thought that's how it would always be. The soldier's gaze softened as he looked at her. You were never truly alone, Lyra. You just didn't see it. You always had the strength to keep going. You just needed someone to remind you. Lyra's chest tightened. The soldier's words were simple, but they carried a weight she had never expected to feel. She had always been strong, but strength wasn't the only thing that mattered. It needed connection. She needed to feel like she wasn't the last one left. You've given me that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The soldier smiled, his eyes warm as he leaned closer. We've given each other that. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly as they both gathered their thoughts. Lyra felt a new sense of clarity wash over her. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They were together, and that was enough. The soldier stood up and stretched, his movements slow but purposeful. We'll need to rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next move. Lyra nodded, but as she watched him move, she knew there was no longer any need to worry about tomorrow. She wasn't facing it alone. They had each other, and that made all the difference. As the soldier settled down for the night, Lyra lay beside him, her thoughts drifting. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she wasn't afraid anymore. With the soldier by her side, she felt like she could face anything. They were more than just survivors now. They were partners, a team, and as they both closed their eyes to sleep, Lyra felt something deep inside her, the spark of hope. The possibility of a future, a family. The world outside could still be dangerous, still filled with enemies. But for the first time in a long time, Lyra wasn't afraid of what came next. She had found something worth fighting for, something worth living for, and together they would face whatever came their way.